let's just talk now then to Pilgrim Tucker, who's a community organiser here in this part of London. And Pilgrim, we know there's some real anger here, and you've worked here for a long time, and there were, we know, a lot of resident concerns about the refurbishment at Grenfell Tower.
Yeah, very, very valid concerns and problems prior to the refurbishment. That council block had been allowed to decline. The council had almost, you could say, they'd deliberately managed the decline of that block.
And yet they spent £10 million refurbishing it last year.
Well, they spent £8 million and they paid that directly to a private contractor to do what was mainly cosmetic works on the outside of the building. Meanwhile, the residents' concerns were around their safety. They were around things like alarms, sprinklers, emergency lighting, problems with the electricity that the council or the council's management organisation just ignored. And in fact, they went more than ignoring them. They actually persecuted and bullied the tenants who tried to raise that as an issue.
That does seem extraordinary. We know that there was a blog as well from one of the residents saying that it would take something catastrophic for their concerns to actually be addressed.
Yeah, you know, now it's too late. But they were warned and warned again so many times. The residents were angry then. They had had enough then. But once they started organising, we managed to get some improvements to what was being planned. But at the same time, the residents were being threatened with legal action by the council.
What in particular were your worries? I mean, we know about the issue of the cladding, but I mean, obviously there has to be a huge investigation into whether that was why the fire spread so quickly. But sprinklers, alarms...
Alarms, emergency lighting, potentially problems with the electricity. The refurbishment was putting in boilers in very narrow corridors right in front of the front doors. That's what the residents were objecting to when I was working with them. It was a fire hazard, and you know, as you can see from that blog, the residents were talking about it for a long, long time. Now, I'm not surprised if residents are furious now. And to be honest, this is an absolute tragedy, but it's not dissimilar to what's being allowed to happen to social housing across London. It's not being maintained because there is profit and value to be found in that land. There's very, very, very valuable land here, and very powerful property development and building contractors who are making lots and lots of money, and it's resulting in lives lost.
Okay, well, Pilgrim Tucker, thank you very much indeed for being with us, a community organiser here.
Police were pushing us away. Fathers was coming from the prayer, so they had to see literally their children and their wives on the window. Hopeless, can't do anything. And we're like, well, it's burning on the side and it's just starting. Let's get the people off all that side of the building. The police was like, no, go away. We're dealing with this. Go. They pushed us literally from the bridge all the way down. We run around to the car wash, and we've seen the fire it coming upwards and then gradually going on the roof. By then, there were more time that people could get off. But the police officers and the parents on the telephone, they've been told, stay in your property. Yeah. Don't come down. It's dangerous. Yeah. Sorry, it was not dangerous. I have footages, and my iPhone does not lie about the timing. They had time to escape, but they were on the window screaming and shouting. When it got the fire happened from the outside in. Didn't happen from the inside out. It started from the outside in. They had plenty of time. Let me tell you, the fireman came 2 hours later. Okay, couldn't even park their car anyway to get access through, so they came all the way to Hurstwood Walk, put their car there, and then they took the water out. By the time they did that, it was 4:25, and I had them recorded. Okay, and then before that, 2 o'clock, we seen all the children, parents crying, shouting, mans, and I have them videos, which I gave it to everybody, but they didn't even air it. Literally just screaming, and we were screaming because we were hopeless. And they're just like a piece of paper when you burn it from one side to another. That's exactly what we've seen it happen to them. And 1 minute they're dead, and the next minute we're gone. Let me tell you, my friend's neighbor's son works as a fire crewsman. He said more than 50 children are dead.
We don't know that.
but they're not confirmed because their parents are missing.
Yes.
And they're not going to tell them. But more than 100 bodies are dead as well. Not 12, I'm sorry. Look at that building! Are you telling me 12 people? Yeah? Why the police are standing at, in the beginning, I'm sorry, I was there with the police officers.
I know.
They only had one staircase. One! I'm shaking. One?
I reject absolutely, and with the degree of passion I feel on average about once a decade, I reject absolutely the suggestion that this shouldn't be politicised. It is politics from the very top to the very bottom of that burnt-out carcass of a building. Social housing is, by its very definition, political. Poverty is, by its very definition, political. The kind of people who would ordinarily try to turn anything into a point-scoring exercise, bleating from the sidelines at the moment that this shouldn't be politicised, should really do us all a favour and keep stum. Fire service cuts are political. Public sector spending is political. Emergency services warning about tragedies being stored up unnecessarily for the future is the very essence of politics. If you don't think this is already political, absolutely, irredeemably and completely political, then I'm afraid you inhabit a planet I do not recognise. But there is a difference between politics and politicking. I have told you many times, many times, more times than I care to remember. In fact, it's a stuck record, a mantra repeated so often you've even started to tease me about it and suggest that I might have some sort of homoerotic fixation with the fire service. I have, since 2010, been telling you that this city has been subjected to a callous and morally outrageous system of government that has seen people who run into the buildings that we carry our children out of when they're burning treated like cattle, treated like scum, treated like absolutely undeserving, lead-swinging chancers who, remember, was it the Sun or the Mail that found a firefighter during the last round of industrial action who commuted to do his shifts from one of the Balearic Islands and used that as evidence that somehow they didn't deserve public support? The journalists who queued up to write columns and present programmes deriding firefighters for having the audacity to warn that assaults upon their pensions and reductions in their provisions could somehow be justified, and that when firefighters complained it was because they had such a cushy life of Riley. Spanish practices thrown around by journalists who contributed to the destruction of their own unions. But there is a difference between politics and politicking, and I don't know how helpful anger is yet.
I am going to be joined now by the singer Lily Allen. She lives in this area and is well known amongst the local community and knows a fair amount about the background to this whole issue. Lily Allen, what's your sense of what a public inquiry should be looking at?
Well, I think that there needs to be questions answered about fire regulations and why, a bill that was meant to be passed was voted against by 312 Tory Conservative MPs, 80 of which I hear are landlords. There has to be a conflict of interest there, and that needs to be investigated. I think.
You think basically the property involvement of MPs, particularly Conservative MPs, affects their judgment on what should be done?
That's what's being said here on the ground. I think there's a lot of anger here towards the council, how they've dealt with people's concerns building up to this event, and how they've dealt with things after the event as well. A lot of
the people I've spoken to draw attention to the reality that this is the richest borough in Britain, possibly in the world. After all, you have Chelsea down there, and you have clearly Kensington, North Kensington here.
Holland Park. They're some of the most expensive properties on planet Earth.
But you live here. Do you sense that there is any attempt at all to bind these two societies together?
No, not really. I think that actually the council tends to try and drive people apart slightly here. I think, so many community centres have been closed down, pubs have been closed down and made into, posh gastro pubs and housing for rich people. People are encouraged not to congregate and discuss what's happening in this area. They're not encouraged to have a community spirit, but look what happens when something like this happens. They know that the council don't care about them, that it's them that's going to care for themselves.
I think one of the things that any outsider like me coming in finds is that the community is actually immensely strong
Yeah.
and extraordinarily bound together, despite...
Yeah. And we have an amazing event here at the end of every August, Notting Hill Carnival, and the Conservatives are doing everything in their power to try and shut it down or to try and privatise it and try and charge people.
Well,
it's constant.
But then on the other hand, I suppose people looking at it may say, well, she's probably pretty well off. I guess she lives in a nice house and all the rest of it.
I do now, because I've had a lot of money, but I didn't used to when I grew up around here.
Really? So how would you see it might be possible to bring a little more reality into these people's lives, particularly in Chelsea?
Well, I think, first of all, if we're talking about reality into these people's lives, I think that what people would really like is a more honest count of how many people have actually died in this event, how many people have been killed. And, you know, I think that the humanitarian effort on the ground here, the volunteering, which is being led by community leaders and volunteers, is not being led by the council. It's being run by the people of this community. And it is chaotic. They don't have any experience with it. And I think that it's actually playing into the hands of the government, because once these people's hope turns to anger, they've got a real problem on their hands. And that is what I feel like the government are trying to micromanage people's breathing here. That's what's happening. I've never in my entire life seen an event like this where the death count has been downplayed by the mainstream media. 17, I'm sorry, but I'm hearing from people that the figure is much closer to 150, and that many of those people are children.
In thanking you, I'm bound to say that the difficulty is that
those are off-the-record numbers that I've been given from policemen and from firemen.
I'm also aware of it, and I actually said at the beginning of the programme that the death toll is likely to mount very considerably.
So why is that not coming out now? I don't understand.
The difficulty is that they have to identify bodies, and there can be very little left in this building, and that's the difficulty. I appreciate
that, but these are families, and when you have to identify a body, you report it to the next of kin. There are no next of kin.
Lily Allen, thank you very, very much.
Sophie Khan acted as lawyer for the residents group of the Lakanal house fire in 2009, in which 6 people died. She's here in the studio. Good evening, Sophie Khan. When you saw that fire last night, it must have brought back awful memories.
It did, and questions have to be asked as to how, after a very detailed inquest and narrative verdicts and a Rule 43 report to the government, why this could happen again.
Is the right way a public inquiry?
That's not the right way. The right way is inquests. The families have a right to participate, they have a right to cross-examine, they have the right to put questions to all the experts. They are even able to get their own experts if the coroner gives permission. The coroner is independent of the government. In a public inquiry, it is very much government-led.
And I'm right in saying there's absolutely no way that any resident, any family member can take part and ask questions in a public inquiry?
Not in a public inquiry. There's a very limited rules in public inquiries. It is very much government-led, government-controlled, government outcome.
Do you think this was avoidable?
This was avoidable, 100%, because the sprinklers, even though it wouldn't have saved the building, I think it would have saved the individuals inside the building. It would have given them time to get out. The building, I believe, would have perished, but the individuals wouldn't have perished. And this is not just after the Lakanal house. There is studies here.
Is it your experience that, by and large, residents and residents association are not listened to?
They're not listened to, but also the fire assessments. We have to look at the fire assessments, because here there is a fire issue as well. It's not just the council we need to look at. What were the fire brigade doing? The refurbishments have been done. What tests did they do on the building?
But these are questions, as you say, that the residents will not be able to ask anyone in the public inquiry. In your view, is this a kind of unintended consequence of the public inquiry, or do you think it's an absolutely worked out position that if the government goes for a public inquiry and not an inquest, they will be not subject to the same scrutiny?
Yes, that is correct, because in an inquest they lose control of what a jury verdict will do. And the juries will come out with narrative verdicts which may be very difficult for the government to
But you can
hear.
only have one or another, you can't have both.
You can't have both, you can only have one or the other.
So what would you be urging residents to do right now, to kick up a fuss, to change?
Yes. They should really be demanding an inquest from the government. to say this is not the right way, we don't want a public inquiry, we want an inquest. And I'm very concerned as to why Mrs May came out so quickly to say public inquiry. What is there that she knows that